we just want to get back, or I just want to get back to where we were. I just want to get back to where we were. And I remember saying this, and I wasn't sure how this was going to land to one of the couples. I said, well, maybe we should think not about getting back to where you were. That may not be possible, right? You are different people. Your years of experiences under the bridge, you're in a different place. You could get to a different place, maybe a better place, a new place, but it's not going to be what it was when you were dating or that first year of marriage, for example, you know.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Kira Yakubov, licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of Heal Your Roots Wellness Practice. Every episode, we talk with a professional from the mental health field to learn more about their approaches and specialties, and also their journey of becoming a therapist. In this podcast, we'll uncover a deeper look at the world of therapy from new perspectives. You'll meet the therapists of Heal Your Roots Wellness Practice and trusted colleagues from the community tackling mental well-being. We're your go-to network for practical and professional insight in mental health. Subscribe for new episode releases every other Wednesday.
Thank you so much, David Koppisch, for being back on. I know we had you in our last season, and I'm really excited to have this new episode with you today. So thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I know when we were kind of discussing different topics and ideas to talk about today, I know you mentioned kind of there's been a trend that you've been seeing with your clientele, specifically with men and kind of relationships. Can you share a little bit more about what that's been like for you, or kind of the trend that you've been running into recently?
Sure. So first of all, thanks again for having me. This is a pleasure, and it's always great to talk. So I really appreciate being here.
Of course.
Well, I think that what I've been seeing lately is, we'll see, how much of a trend it is. But what I have been seeing in several clients lately, particularly men who are in relationships, whether they're in marriages or whether in long-term living together partnerships, domestic partnerships, long-term relationships, several men coming with some challenges around a couple of different categories. One is, and I'd like to get into this a little bit more. One is what I would call struggles with anxious attachment, essentially. So I know attachment theory is widely talked about these days, which is great. It does seem helpful to help some clients sort of explain what it is that they're going through and what it is that they're feeling. And so what I see in some clients, this sort of tendency to be so preoccupied with the relationship and so anxious around what the status of the relationship is, and a compulsion that they don't want to have. A lot of these men, they don't. This is not voluntary, but there's a sort of a compulsion around. And I'm speaking particularly right now of heterosexual relationships. But what is she feeling? Why hasn't she called back, for example? Why hasn't she responded to my texts? Why do I feel like I'm always initiating and moving towards, and I don't feel that there's a lot of initiation coming back to me? And so it's sort of an obsession and a preoccupation with the level of closeness, the feelings of closeness, the feelings of connection, and often never feeling totally satisfied with reaching a level of connection that feels secure, essentially, maybe for short periods of time. And what I've been trying to, have conversations with these clients about a couple things. One is just sort of going back to, again, what was it like in your household growing up? What did you see between your own parents, if you lived with both parents? What was your relationship with them in terms of your own attachment to them, your own sense of security in terms of knowing or not that they were there for you, that even if you were separated, you were safe, they were still going to be there for you when you came back, that kind of thing. And a lot of men, people haven't really thought about that too much. Like, what happened when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in terms of how I felt about and how I felt I was parented, how that connects to me now that I'm 30, 40, 50, 60, in terms of my relationships. Sure. Most of us haven't thought about that. We've been fortunate enough, to sort of be trained in a lot of that. And so now we think about that, but most folks don't go around thinking about that too much. And so it's helping folks. Okay, let's go back to how the way you relate, where that came from, so sort of going back to that. And I think, a lot of these men, and again, just talking in this case about men primarily, I think they're suffering, I think on the surface, and they are often, and it's understandable, they're being told by their partners or their spouses that this is sort of controlling behavior, because I'm sure it feels like controlling when you're getting what feels like an unnecessary amount of text messages, how are you? What are you doing? Contact. Where have you been? I thought you'd be home by now, you said we were going to spend some time together tonight at 10. Well, it's now 10:02. And, where are you? Why are you still busy downstairs? Well, I'm waiting for you in the bedroom, kind of thing, that I'm sure is experienced as controlling. Right. And so, but what I see in most of these partners is that they're suffering. They don't want to be this way. Like they don't like being, sort of essentially insecure and always feeling like they have to grasp and reach out and be reassured and that kind of thing. So I can get into more specifics, but I am seeing some of that, and trying to, work with clients to try to figure that out, where it comes from. And I have clients have said, and which is great self-awareness right off the bat. It's important to know where this comes from, not just how can I stop? So
the way society and our culture shapes the way in heterosexual relationships, how men and women are supposed to act during dating or even in long-term relationships, like that the man is supposed to be the one that initiates and puts in more effort and like in the beginning. And that if the woman does that, it's seen as clingy, right? Like these different words and adjectives get placed on different people based on their gender. But it's interesting because that anxious attachment style, or that need to know, like, can you please reassure me that you're still here or that you still care about me, right? It's more about the narrative. It's like, if I don't hear from you, or if these particular reassuring behaviors aren't present, and if it's a long period of time, then I'm going to start creating a narrative around, well, they may not care about me. What does this mean? Of course they don't. This always happens to me. Yep. Maybe I'm being too clingy. I need to figure out what's going on. I'm going to reach out, right? Like, how can I soothe this anxiety immediately in this moment through the other person? Yeah. And not necessarily through self-soothing.
Yeah. And I think some of that reaching out for reassurance, for some, if it's done in a certain kind of way, unfortunately makes things worse, right? If it comes across as, again, why haven't you called? I thought you were going to be back, et cetera, et cetera. And that could, trigger something from their partner in something like, why don't you trust me? I told you what I was doing. I don't have to give you a minute by minute update. Or I've just, I the mood I was in earlier today, I'm in a different mood now. Like, I don't have to explain. I shouldn't have to explain that, and that can, again, those are very understandable kinds of responses, but that can sort of trigger a cycle of some ineffective communication, because that can make the anxious anxious partner more anxious, or more, feeling more insecure. I think with, so one thing that's been that I've been trying to do with some of these clients is two things. One is sort of emotionally focused, and one is a little bit more cognitively focused. So one is, as you just mentioned, sort of, okay, when you get this thought of, you know, where are they, or why didn't they want to do something with me tonight, or why were they not interested in being intimate tonight, or whatever the thought is that triggers some anxiety, helping them think about, or helping them identify, okay, what is the feeling underneath that? And as you just mentioned, you know, for many, and makes sense, I think, that for a lot of them, it's loneliness, it's feeling like they're not close, feeling a little isolated, a little abandoned, and sort of understanding that first, and then helping them understand or practice a little bit how to convey that in a way that's not going to, you know, again, come across as either too needy or too clingy, but coming across as, you know, this is what I'm feeling, as opposed to, why are you doing or not doing that thing that I want you to do?
Yeah.
That can help, you know, that can help. I think for some men, it's sort of helping them understand a little bit more deeply about what is going on inside of them. That in and of itself, even if they don't always convey that, it can be helpful. I think on the cognitive side, it's sort of like helping them understand, okay, what is your pattern? Does your pattern seem to be a thought that goes to the worst case scenario right away, right? So, you know, if I came home and my wife, partner, girlfriend was not as effusive or excited or affectionate that I was hoping they would be when I got home, if the thought is, oh, they must be mad at me, right? Or, oh, I must have done something wrong. Or, you know, they're losing interest in me, you know, going to the worst possible scenario and thinking, okay, what are some alternatives there? What are some other alternative interpretations, right? Could it be that they just, you know, got a text from work that made them upset, and that's where their mind is and has nothing to do with you, for example? Whatever kind of other alternative. And there are probably millions of alternatives in between, you know, where they're at, that it's nothing to the worst possible scenario, you know, and helping with some of those cognitive reframings can be helpful.
And I think I'm glad you say that it goes to kind of the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario involves them, right? Like it's in reference to themselves. It's something is happening that I'm interpreting as not positive. Mm-hmm. It could be negative. How is this relating to me?
Right.
Versus this person just is existing, doing their thing. They have their own emotions, feelings, right? Like other things happening in their life. Mm-hmm. And I'm witnessing it, and I can check in to see what's going on for them versus how is this going to impact me directly right away.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And it's almost like, and it's like I had a very anxious attachment style, mm-hmm. especially for romantic.
Okay.
Until, you know, I worked through that with my husband. He has a lot more of a secure one, but it would be, I'm experiencing anxiety. And so in order to control that anxiety, I want you to do something different so that I stop feeling this way. But that gives away our control and power, right? And then we get angry with them, why they keep doing mm-hmm. this thing, versus like, okay, like I need to figure out why I'm getting so triggered by this behavior. Why am I making it about me? Yeah. How else can I self-soothe myself? And then express, hey, you know, like when this happens, I feel disconnected from you and I need more reassurance mm-hmm. during moments like that, if you can provide it.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of practice to go through.
Yeah, it does. And I think it does take both partners mm-hmm. to kind of work on that together. I think one thing I have seen with some clients who I'm just seeing them and not them as a couple, but just the one partner, that they can certainly do a lot on their own, but there's only so much they can do, and so it sounds like with your personal experience, you were, you had a partner who you could work with and understood that and helped you make some of those adjustments.
Sure.
I think without that, it can be difficult. And when there are partners who are not in the couples, therapy, if they're not in couples therapy, who are understandably frustrated with their partner's behavior, but just sort of waiting for them to change and sort of like, get back to me when you've changed kind of thinking, And again, I get it. And I think that's difficult. I think some of these clients are running into feeling like, well, I feel like I am trying to work on this, and I feel like I am trying to put some tools into place where I'm, as simple as, doing some breathing exercises before I reach out in an anxious way, before I go to the worst possible conclusion, or, not asking lots of what's wrong questions, you seem upset questions, when you realize that triggers, kind of defensive responses, holding back on those things. But feeling like their partner isn't recognizing that they are doing some work and making some small changes. And that frustrates them. And so they kind of pull back a little bit, so it is challenging, I think, if the other sort of offended partner, and again, understandably so, but if they're not kind of on board with, okay, how are we going to help this person, my partner, my husband, my spouse, to change this, other than just do it on your own and get back to me when you're all fixed, kind of thing. Which
I don't want to see the dirty work.
which I'm sure we've all done at some point at some level, right? So,
and it's very important that you say that, right? Because we can do individual work and we can do so much on our own to work on those behaviors. And a relationship is circular, right? Like, it is maintained. The dynamic is maintained by both people.
Yes.
So a lot of the time, if someone has an anxious attachment style, they may attract or get into a dynamic with someone who has very much an avoidant attachment style.
Right.
Which is going to trigger and keep them in this cycle, which I think at this point, a lot of people have heard that, right? Like anxious and avoidant, or the pursuer and the distancer. And so they're both insecure attachment styles, right? Like, the best scenario is if you have one of those and meet someone who has a secure attachment,
right,
so that they can help you heal that. But it's not like everyone's walking around with a sign on their head that says the kind of attachment style they have.
Right.
And so it's important to recognize that, like, when we're feeling anxious, we're so in our body and like everything feels so uncomfortable that we just want it to stop. And we don't think about how this is impacting our partner and how that's making them feel, right? So if someone has an avoidant attachment style, someone coming towards you and wanting more and more reassurance is horrifying.
It's overwhelming.
Right? Like, whoa, I don't know how much I can give you. This is more than I even thought I could provide. Like, I need to step back, which, like, oh crap. Now they're like, oh, don't leave. And even more.
It's, wouldn't it be nice if we all knew our own and each other's attachment styles? I think the good news is, I think some research bears this out, that, that people can change. They can certainly learn new skills and ways of being, especially if they're working in conjunction with their partner to do that. And for their partner to see that this is not a character flaw or an intentional, that it's not intentional, right? That they are just being, a nudge on purpose kind of thing.
Sure.
Learned behavior that comes from somewhere, and that probably is served a purpose, a survival purpose at some level, right? and it's not meant to be damaging to the relationship. It just is something that does not work anymore, and needs to be adjusted.
So I think it is important to recognize where it comes from. And I love that you say that it's a learned behavior that we develop to survive, right? So a lot of times the environment we have growing up is we pick up those signs. So if we live in a household or an environment where one or both parents or someone in the home is easily triggered, they might go off, they might have a temper, or they're very emotional. Or if you do something that they deem unacceptable and they immediately kind of withhold their affection and love, you start to pick up on other people's behaviors, nonverbal language, nonverbal like cues, right? Like, oh, mom seems a little off today. I better stay away, right? Like we start to learn all these different patterns, and it's the patterns that we look at. And if something is different from the usual pattern, it must be something bad. So I need to go investigate and figure out what it is and repair it and fix it before it gets worse.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's our little kid version trying to hold the glue together so things don't fall apart around us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I am working with a client who they were the person that had to hold it together. They were the sibling who didn't have as many quote unquote problems as the other siblings. So they were relied upon, maybe not explicitly, but by the parents to be the one to not have any problems because they're dealing with the other siblings' problems. So if you can be, quiet and good and perfect and don't give us any trouble, that's really going to help the family system here because we have these other troubles over on this side. And now they are realizing that a lot of things were kept inside because of that, right? A lot of things that they were suffering from and couldn't get out and couldn't express and couldn't share because they were not, they were told essentially their role was to be the one to hold it all together and the one to, have their act together, quote unquote. And so now they are in adult relationships where they may have entered into those relationships still in that role, and in some ways that's the sort of almost caretaking, right? Because they don't have the problems. They take care of others who do have the problems kind of role. But 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, they're realizing I have needs too. And I really want my partner to meet those needs. And I don't want to be the person who I might've been when we met, where I didn't have a lot of needs because that's how I grew up. You know what I mean? So admitting that, unlearning that, being able to talk about that with their partner to say, look, I am now realizing that I do need some things where I may have appeared to you when we first got together that I didn't have needs, quote unquote. And that requires an adjustment. Yeah.
Which is wild to think about, right? That even from a young age, we learn that I may actually have them, right? Everyone has those needs, but I can't get them met because of what else is happening at home. So for the greater good, I need to figure out how to deal with it on my own. And they do. And so in a lot of ways that can benefit them, right? I mean, a lot of independent people and that are very successful, they've had to do a lot of this stuff on their own and, carry that burden. And so on one hand, they're a very resilient human being. And on the other hand, they're really suffering alone and wanting that help, but kind of feeling scared. And I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but especially for heterosexual relationships, if the man has been in that position where I'm the strong, resilient one, I can take anything, take care of everybody else. And then 5 years down the line, the relationship, it's like, hey, I want to soften up. I need help. And the partner saw them in this way. It's like, oh, things are a little shaky right now. I thought you were the one holding it together for us. Now I got to take you got to pass the baton to me.
Yeah, that's it. I'm glad you brought that up. That's, I have seen that a little bit in terms of couples where that had been the pattern, right, in their relationship, where one, and sometimes often it is the male, who has been the sort of quote person who had it all together. And then all of a sudden they begin to realize, you know what, I don't have it all together, and I have been pretending I've had it all together, and now I'm, you know, that you're right. It can be a little shocking to the system if they were in a pattern of being in certain roles. And then sometimes what could happen is sort of, well, wait a minute. Does this mean that my needs, if you now are going to be expressing needs, does that mean my needs are going to be now in the back burner or something, and it becomes a little bit of a zero-sum game sometimes with couples. It's like if one has a need, then the other one can have a need, or that it has to be put to the side for a while, that they don't feel sometimes that they have the capacity to both express and have and deal with needs. It's sort of like, oh boy, if you're requiring me to sort of attend to you emotionally, I feel like I might lose. I might lose something. I might lose what I have been getting from you. So I think it's helping couples think about it's not either or. It's not sort of like a scale that if you put a little bit of weight on one side, then the other side goes up. And I think that's a protective thing, because I think many of us have a sort of scarcity, like an emotional scarcity mentality, like there isn't enough in the relationship for everyone to kind of get their needs met, kind of thing. So,
sure.
I remember what else I was going to touch on earlier, which was, and I think this came up in our last conversation around seeing a little bit of a thread, a theme in some of the clients I am seeing who are males who are in these long-term relationships, where this anxious attachment kind of experience is causing some tensions. There's a real lack among some of them in terms of anything meaningful outside of their relationship with their partner. And it sounds so simple, like, hobbies or other relationships, or,
Sure.
But it's so clear with some of them that, not that, getting a hobby or going out with a friend every other week is going to magically reduce your anxious attachment, but there really is something to that. I'm seeing with some men who, when I do ask, so at nights, on the weekends, when you are feeling like you're not getting the kind of response or attention or closeness or interaction or engagement from your partner, and you're feeling anxious and disconnected, but they seem fine in doing what they do, what do you do? And often the answer is, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm nervous, and I am sort of waiting around for them to kind of turn to me physically and emotionally. And okay, what else can you do when you come home at night, they're not in a place to like give you lots of attention? What else can you do to occupy yourself, and just sort of working like on some very basic things, like how do you spend your time outside of this relationship? So simple, but so important, and I think it's become popular now. It's a very funny Saturday Night Live skit about the man park. Do you know this?
No.
So the man is home all day, and his female partner comes home from work, and he has interacted with nobody throughout the day and has been home all alone. And so he acts towards her like a puppy would when the puppy's been home all day alone. And And the spouse, the partner, the girlfriend is pretty frustrated with this, that she has to be his all. So she takes him to the man park where he can interact with other men and socialize. And it's pretty funny. But I think it does hit on something that in our culture we do see as, a bit of a thing that's happening, So it's a humorous way to kind of talk about it with some clients, actually. And
that's true. And I know we're talking about it specifically for men, but I mean, obviously that can happen in any relationship, like whichever person is, needing more of that or doesn't have as many outside supports, right? Like I know for female relationships, a lot of times we talk to our girlfriends like, oh my God, this is happening. What should I do? And they talk you off the ledge. They're like, all right, chill. You're being a little too much. Text me if you start to feel anxious, right? Like I've had clients where it's like, what can I do instead of hyper focusing on wanting to reach out to my partner or this new person I'm dating?
Okay.
Is redirect your energy and have someone that you can be vulnerable and that you feel safe with to say like, I'm feeling triggered. I want to express it over here, or even journaling.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm curious, especially for some of your male clients that are still learning to develop either those hobbies or other relationships, like do they have someone to turn to, right? To either occupy themselves or to get advice or just to like help them like vent and process and like cool down?
Yeah. Some do, and some need some help thinking about what that would look like. So it is a mix. I think it's also for some, maybe feeling like they don't deserve to have that time, like separate. I think there's a sort of a mix of like, I don't feel like I have another outlet, but I also feel maybe guilty if I do, use an outlet that's outside of this relationship, because maybe I'm not sure if that's allowed or if that's what they want me to do, kind of thing. And usually it is, that spouses and partners are happy if their partner, has some
go talk to
some social energy directed somewhere else. And then bringing in children. So I am working with some couples with little children, right? And it's just so hard. And if there's no family support or other kinds of social supports, these couples are so isolated and under so much pressure, right? They have a 1-year-old, they have a 2-year-old, and there's no family around to help relieve any of the pressure. And so, they work and then they come home and they take care of their toddler, and then they go to bed, and then they get work, and then they come home and take care of their toddler, and then they go to bed. And this one couple, I've been encouraging them, particularly the male in this couple, because the woman does seem to have a little bit more impetus to engage socially outside of the relationship, but encouraging him to do so. And I just remember this one session where he came in and he said, I've got some exciting news. I think it was like, I met another dad, in the park, in the playground when I had my kid, and we actually made a date to meet for coffee. And he said it was great, and he was so excited. And it was just, it lifted his spirit, and it sort of opened up like, oh yeah, like there is other world. And we didn't, being out for 90 minutes while I had coffee with a friend, I think his spouse, his partner watched the baby while he was like, it didn't destroy them, which they thought it might, because they were so, again, because they don't have supports. It's like, well, if one person's out of the house, that means the other is watching the child. And after a week of, 40, 50 hours of work and, 20, 25 hours of childcare, and then on the weekend, you're going to be alone watching your child when your partner's out having coffee, that feels like it can cause some tension. But she was also so excited that he had done that. And she was like, this is great. He came back. He was in such a good mood. And it just sort of change the course of their weekend, for that very little but really critical social outlet that he was able to make happen, so.
That's really sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about, especially for couples therapy, when couples come in, it's, especially if they're stuck in conflict or in this way, is that they're looking only from their own perspective and what they need and what will be good for them and what their other partner can do differently to make that happen versus what would benefit the relationship.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes that does mean what is going to be better for one individual so that the relationship and the connection can be healthy and continue growing.
Yeah.
And, that means creating space for a different kind of relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know when we were talking about different things to discuss, but that as we grow, we change as individuals, which means that if we want to continue being in this partnership, our relationship has to grow and shift and change and like morph into something new and different.
Yeah.
And if one person or both people aren't on board for that new change, it's going to be really, really tough to accept this new version of their relationship.
Things like, we just want to get back, or I just want to get back to where we were. I just want to get back to where we were. And I remember saying this, and I wasn't sure how this was going to land to one of the couples. I said, well, maybe we should think not about getting back to where you were. That may not be possible, right? You are different people. Your years of experiences under the bridge, you're in a different place. You could get to a different place, maybe a better place, a new place. But it's not going to be what it was when you were dating or that first year of marriage, for example, Sure. So to your point of sort of like growing and changing, and we're different people as we grow, we should be growing, we should be changing. Can we do that together? Can we get to a new place, the relationship? So this sense of like, I just want to go back. I just want to feel that being in love like we did 5 years ago. I think there's a little bit of maybe like, and that's totally natural, right? But it's maybe a little bit of like mourning that if it's not there now, but saying, but that doesn't mean you can't get to a new place that may be better than you thought you could ever be, but thinking about going backwards, I just feel like it's not it doesn't feel productive,
Yeah.
But to acknowledge that could be sad.
That.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that you said mourning, because I hear that a lot from couples.
You do?
Like, oh, I wish we can just go back to the beginning. Why can't it just be like how it was? Yeah. And when I hear that, it's like, oh, they're more like they're grieving. Yeah. They're grieving that version of their relationship, that version of their partner, that version of themselves. Yeah. And, it's like reminiscing, wanting to go back to the good old days. Yeah. But when we're there, we don't recognize it.
No,
right?
No. Or we think it'll last forever and this is standard or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think grieving that is huge. And I don't think that's talked about a lot. I think we see grieving as, like big losses, right. Like losses of like a death, a job, like moving somewhere, like really tangible things versus grieving like a version of ourselves or our relationship. Yeah. And knowing like it's okay to miss that, and it's okay to cherish those memories and that connection, and making sure we create enough space for this new version of ourselves and our partner so we can continue growing. Yeah. Because if we stay stuck in wanting to go back, then it's just resisting change. Yeah. Right. And we know that anytime we resist change, it's futile because it's going to keep going around us. We're just going to have to catch up to it.
Right. Yeah. And then exploring, well, what is that about, right? What is making us want to preserve a state of being that might be 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 years old? What is that about? What are we fearing? I know we're coming up against some time, but I just wanted to mention, you had asked about, so what are some tools? What are some ways that couples can sort of grapple with these kinds of things? One thing that I've been using a lot lately, which seems to be pretty helpful, I know it's a pretty popular book. It's The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, which is from the Gottman Research on Couples. And there are some exercises in that book that I do assign to some couples that are, some of them are fun. And so that in and of itself kind of helps if there's tension, just to sort of gives them something fun to do. There are these love map exercises where they sort of quiz each other on how well they actually do know each other, you know. And I think not that, and there's a lot of exercises in there, and some are you know, deeper and more a little bit, require a little bit more vulnerability than just sort of like how well do you know your partner, but they can be really helpful with, I've seen with some couples in a sort of reconnecting. Right. Oh, yeah, we do actually have a lot in common kind of thing. Oh, yeah, we do really have a story of our relationship that's exciting and fun and is meaningful to me, like that we have forgotten because we've been in tension. And it can, you know, and it can help them sort of figure out, okay, do we want to move forward kind of thing? Are some of the things we're identifying in some of these exercises maybe things that we can't resolve? You know, so I do recommend that that book and those exercises a lot. So
yeah, I love that. And I was I was brushing up on that book and like the Gottman research. And for the listeners, we've talked about Gottman before, but that him and his wife have done a lot of research with thousands and thousands of couples, taping them have conflict and being able to use that data and see, you know, within the first 5 minutes, they can predict if this couple is going to make it or not, which is
it's
wild
amazing.
to think about.
It's a little scary.
I know. But what was really interesting is remembering back is that they wrote 69% of conflict is perpetual and not resolvable, and that is totally normal and okay. And that it's not necessarily that happy couples don't fight or they don't have these perpetual problems. It's rather, they have a lot more positive interactions and perspective of their relationship, but also that they've found a way to accept that this is going to be a part of my life, right? It said, like, can you accept these differences or these flaws in your partner forever, right? Because some of this stuff is like, it, you know, we can modify how we interact with each other. We can do this, this, and that. But like at the end of the day, like, can I deal with my partner having this?
Yeah.
Is this the deal breaker? And if it's no, then it's like, okay, like, got to choose my battles, got to figure out how to, you know, come down from arguments. But that a lot of this is going to be unresolved, unfortunately.
No, that's a pretty amazing statistic. And it's I think it is helpful for a lot of couples, for them to realize that. And it's that maybe it takes some pressure off that we have to fix all these things. Like, no, you don't have to. It's okay. Like, you're two different people. You will need to live with some differences, you know, and accepting them and not worrying about, oh, we must fix these, otherwise maybe we're not meant to be together. Which is not realistic. It just reminds me of the, you know, the phrase of, you could either be married or you could be right. And which oversimplifies things, but there's a lot to be said about that, you know, in terms of letting go of some of that sort of keeping score and some of that fixating on some differences that really are not that consequential if you look at the bigger picture. So helping clients see that. So
yeah. And sometimes the best thing we can do is agree to disagree. Right? Like, I know it's easier said than done, but no matter, I mean, there will be situations, right, where if you can verbalize in an effective way and your partner's in the space to hear it and receive it, they can validate that and they can understand it. And then there's other times where no matter how much each of you share it, you're just not going to get it.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And it's just like, okay, like, we're just going to respect this difference. and just let it be
Mm-hmm.
there. Like, we don't have to keep digging at it
Mm-hmm.
unless it's like, a big decision we have to make. Like, it's imminent, happening right now,
Right.
versus like an ideology or an experience.
Yeah.
We're just going to have to let it lie there for some time.
Yeah. There's something else in that book that's really strikes me, which is it's about these unresolvable differences, which is in their research and their experience, the Gottmans, that partners don't generally change or respond to the thing that their partner is asking them to change or adjust or be different on if they don't feel understood. So sometimes requests are made, about change your behavior, whether it's something small as, emptying the dishwasher in a certain way, or something bigger about, relating to, parenting styles or something like that, that if the partner who's being asked to change or stop a behavior or change a trait or something, if they don't feel understood in terms of why they do act that way, they're not going to change. Like they're not interested. They're maybe not able to change. And so first is understanding the partner before any bid to ask them to adjust themselves can happen effectively.
Sure.
And I think that's really interesting. And I see truth in that. So.
Absolutely. And I saw that it was, some of these like numbers and statistics are nuts, but it was, if you feel like you cannot influence your partner,
yes,
then what is like 81% of the time the relationship is doomed if it like persists, right? And it's kind of like what you're saying is if what I'm sharing doesn't make a difference or doesn't impact your behavior, you don't take it into consideration, this is where it becomes you versus me, and less of like, okay, obviously I don't want you to feel that way, and this is what's been going on, so let's negotiate. And you do it more in good faith, right? Like when you're in good standing with somebody, it's easier to compromise and negotiate versus, well, you don't understand me, you don't care to understand me, so why would I reach out with the same consideration to you? And it might not be conscious, but internally we have that stubborn protective side to ourselves, like, well, if you're not going to go half the mile, I'm not going to go half the mile.
Yeah. A lot of protection, a lot of self-protection, a lot of if I make a step towards you, does that mean I'm losing in some way, kind of thing, so I want you to take the first step towards me, kind of dynamic. So
sure.
The other thing I just wanted to mention was something I'm seeing with a lot of clients, and again, males, mostly middle age and younger, young adult, is this, there's a real a sense of urgency around their role as provider. And, traditionally that's obviously been, a role and identity of a lot of men in marriages and relationships, being sort of the financial provider, that kind of thing. It's still a pretty strong, thread and theme I'm seeing with a lot of men, and their anxiety around, if I don't do my job perfectly, I might lose my job, kind of thing. And when asked about like, well, is there something actually happening at your job? Did you get, bad review? Are there layoffs, things like that? And often there isn't, but there is this anxiety around that. And I'm curious, I'm not really sure what that's about. I don't know if it's sort of something related to the pandemic, something related to fears now in the air of, are we moving towards a recession? Or, that sort of, there's something happening with a lot of men who seem to be experiencing this sort of anxiety. And I think that also might relate to, I don't know what else I have, if that's what I am in this relationship. If something happens with my job, what does that mean for me? I had one client talk about if he loses there was something about layoffs in his company or something like that. And he said how embarrassing that would be for me. how embarrassing that would be. And I just tried to validate
Wow.
that, but also say, well, look, you just open the headlines. And I think I saw the other day something like, I think it was Microsoft or something, announces 12,000 layoffs, around the world. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
that's nothing to be embarrassed about. Like, this is beyond your control, it sounds like, in this particular incident. But it was
Yeah.
really sort of like, I don't know how I could bear that. I don't know how I could talk about that if this happens to me. And just sort of helping them understand, like, this happens. It happens to people all the time. I was laid off last year. And yeah, it was a shocker, but it was also like, I didn't do anything wrong in this situation. Like, this was beyond me. And it was hard at first. It was humbling. And then it was like, oh, maybe this is an opportunity for something new. And so I think there's a lot of, for many folks of all kinds, but just sort of, I do see this in some men who are in, either marriages or long-term partnerships, where there is some anxiety around this provider role and fearing if that's shaky, what does that mean for me?
Sure. I mean, it touches on so many parts of our life and aspects, right? Like, not just internally of like the identity or this particular role that this person has taken on, like what they provide in the relationship, but like, what are the consequences now, financially and relationally? Like, I've heard clients say this too, like, is my partner still going to find me attractive? Like, I don't feel like a man, I won't be able to perform in bed. Like, a lot of this has come up is that it's so much intertwined with their manhood.
Yes.
And their female partners are like, I still love you. I care about you. I don't see you in any different way. I mean, sure, we're going to have to figure out a different financial source, but we're a team to do that. This isn't like your whole being.
Yeah.
And I think it's tough to separate those, right? Because first it's the shock, and then, it's the stages of grief within that. But also, once we get through that, is like you're saying, is it really does open our opportunities to so many things that we would not have ever imagined because the circumstances were never like that before.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is scary. I mean, I don't want to minimize that, but I do feel like some clients are carrying a burden in that maybe they don't have to, or that they don't have to alone, for sure. And to have the conversation that you just said about, if you are in a good relationship, that should be a source of getting through this in a way that's not going to sort of threaten your identity existentially, kind of thing. But in terms of the attraction, I was working with a client who did go through a period of unemployment and medical issues, and was really just a couple of really bad years where they were incapacitated in terms of not being able to work and provide, and even just be physically able to do things around the house because of a health issue, and feeling like I am no longer like you said, I'm no longer attractive because now I'm needy, I'm dependent, kind of thing. And really, and taking a long time to sort of work through that and work out of that, to again accept, like, these were things beyond my control. Your partner is there for you. This is not, you are not flawed as a human being because these things happen, but there's a lot of shame, I guess, in terms of feeling dependent for a lot of us, for of course. Yeah.
I feel like we could keep talking for hours, but I know that we're coming close. I feel like we covered a lot of good stuff. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So David, any final notes or thoughts you want to share before we kind of close out this episode?
Just thank you. I appreciate this conversation. I learn from these conversations. I appreciate it. And I hope folks who are listening find these helpful. And I hope folks will reach out if they, do want to learn more and are seeking some help. We invite you to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on, David.
Thank you.
And if anyone is interested with working with David, whether it's an individual or a couple, you can head over to our website at healyourrootswellness.com, schedule a free consultation, and we'll see if it's a good fit.